much, Deb. And thank you so much, Deb. And thank you for the invitation to come and talk with all of you at Winona. It is exciting to be here. My name is Karen. I've been the director for MUUSJA for about 2 years now. And following on Ashley Horan, who led MUUSJA for 5 years and now is the organizing strategy director for the UUA. So still working very closely as you'll see. MUUSJA, which we remember by MUUSJA, a very Minnesota name, is the Minnesota Unitarian Universalist Social Justice Alliance. And what I'd like to do today is to tell you a little bit about what that means and how we connect with the congregations across Minnesota and also now North and South Dakota, where we have 5 congregations total. And how we also connect with UU organizing bodies around the country and around the region, and with community partners and interfaith partners around the state and region to move ahead across a number of particular issues, but particularly to form a network of justice-loving people who are interested in the common good and creating beloved community.
Just let it go, forget it.
Okay.
We honor with gratitude the land itself and the Native people who have stewarded it throughout the generations. We will.
And I'm going to pause that for a second just to check. Deb, could you wave at me if the sound is coming through okay? Okay, lovely, thank you.
Will not erase them. If you have a chalice with you, I invite you to join me in lighting it at this time, as together we create shared sacred space for our gathering this evening. Our chalice lighting words come from the Reverend Jamie Yandel. We light this flame to ignite the sacred power of justice. We light this flame so that it may be a beacon of hope in moments of uncertainty, fear, anxiety, and the unknown. We light this flame and are emboldened by its blaze, knowing that our strength as a prophetic and powerful people is rooted in the diverse ways that we answer the call to love.
This is Katie Klein, who is our Northern Regional Organizer in Duluth.
If you want to hold up your chalice, if you have it with you, so we can share the light that we bring to this space tonight.
When we are so assaulted is the only word that comes to mind, assaulted by the news of the world and feeling like we must hold back this tide, this storm, it can feel pretty lonely. And especially, you know, a small social justice group in a congregation or one group that's working on one particular thing. And MUUSJA helps us feel like we are not alone. We connect with other Unitarian Universalists across the state and actually across the country because MUUSJA is hooked into the state advocacy networks. It really gives us a sense of movement building. And I just feel like, especially in this pandemic year, when we're all in our own little individual spaces trying to do some work, MUUSJA continues to connect us. So I think what MUUSJA does is amplify the work that's already going on and connect people to help build this power.
So you heard from Katie Klein, who is our amazing regional organizer, the Northern Region Director up in Duluth. Katie also serves as the Director of Faith Formation for the Duluth congregation. And I think during this presentation, you probably won't have a chance to hear from Allison Wyeth, who is our metro area regional director, and who also organizes all of our presence at Pride festivals across the state. We have 2 employees. Each of them is working 10 to 15 hours a week for MUUSJA. It's somewhat seasonal, so their hours kind of shift with the tides a bit. And I work 20 hours a week for MUUSJA. And I've been doing that for about 2 years, and that is our entire staff. My own background is lifelong cradle-born UU. I was born in Boston and grew up in Southern California and have lived all over the country. I belong to about 13 different UU congregations. And I think that gave me a sense of the incredible heterogeneity and diversity among Unitarian Universalists, not only in terms of how we ground our faith, but also in the kinds of life experiences and skills and focus that each of us brings to living out our faith in the world. And one of the things that I think that has done for me as a leader of MUUSJA, in addition to keeping me humble because people have such incredible talents that they're bringing to this work, is also a very strong commitment to trying to share the idea that the aspect of our faith that has to do with carrying our faith into the world and kind of carrying the flame around in our hearts, you know, in the grocery store and the laundromat and shoveling the sidewalks. That presence is something that every single one of us carries. The work of doing social justice and climate action is something that every single one of us carries and has, in my mind, not only a commitment to, but a responsibility and obligation to carry as best we can. Now, that doesn't mean to be doing the same thing for all people at all times with respect to social justice, any more than it does with any other aspect of worship or pastoral care or community building or internal exploration, anything else that we do as UUs. We're all about diversity and ambiguity, and I think seasons, right? So part of what we try to do with MUUSJA is to say there's always something that all of us can be doing. It's never going to be exactly the same thing at the same time, and it's not going to be the same thing for us as individuals over the course of our lifespans, right? When you're raising young kids or caring, as I did last year, for a spouse who was dying, you can't be present in quite the same way that someone who has more space in their lives to be lobbying legislators, marching in the streets, reading all the books might have. And so So I just want to begin with those messages. That's really, you could leave now, that's the main point, but if you want to stick around, we're going to illustrate some of how MUUSJA is trying to kind of live that out in terms of truly accessible, truly inclusive, truly diverse social justice and climate action work across the state. So let me show you a couple things here. So one of the things that is comes up a lot when we start talking about MUUSJA and the other state action networks is to say, well, why would we bother, with one more organization? I already belong to the League of Women Voters. I already belong to the immigration justice group in my community. I already belong to Black Lives Matter in the Twin Cities. I'm already doing all these things. And so why would I be burdened with a specifically UU group that is doing such work? All right. And I think one of the things that I want to underscore is that as we are showing up as Unitarian Universalists in these spaces, that is not an either or. We have a faith, if you've been a Unitarian Universalist for 30 years, you probably know this, but if you've only been a UU for a year or two, you might not know that people who are Unitarian Universalists have been burned at the stake for their beliefs and for their actions. Unitarian Universalist churches have been in the United States and around the world, hotbeds of disruption and protest, and oftentimes leadership beyond the scope of our tiny numbers. Looking at the history of that is a bigger agenda than we have time for today, but it is fascinating and to be encouraged. And I think that looking at why that has happened, why have so many of our ministers been arrested? Why, when I was a child, were all the Unitarian Universalist adults around me carrying canned goods in the backs of their vans out to La Huelga, to Cesar Chavez, and the Filipino and Mexican-American farm workers in California who were striking because they were living in squalor and simply looking for clean water and housing. And here we still are, right? Why was it that Unitarian Universalist ministers marched and died in Selma during the 60s and have been arrested in Standing Rock and have been arrested again last summer to stop Line 3, where tar sands pipelines are being pumped through the headwaters of the Mississippi River? To me, the fundamental principles that answer that why are the sense that we are part of an interdependent web of all being that often is translated as our environmentalist principle, but actually, I think it's our fundamental principle. Because if we are interdependent, it means that we're not necessarily as exceptional as we might think we are. And one of the things that I love about meeting and talking, particularly with some of the UU congregations that are not as enormous as First Universalist in Minneapolis or Unity over in St. Paul, is that I find that in greater Minnesota, people oftentimes have a stronger sense of that interdependency with our own communities and are more interested and more willing and already more active in doing interfaith work. And I know from talking to Jan and Deb a little bit that many of you already are there, right? Unitarians often suffer from exceptionalism, from the idea that we are just cooler than thou, we are more woke, we are more active, we are more moral. And I gotta tell you, that's just flat out not true. We have a fantastic faith, and it is powerful and real. And so don't a lot of other people that we need to be partnering with. I think it gets tricky because many of us in UU circles who are coming in from experiences of trauma or marginalization or rejection in particular faith communities that are not following the WWJD rule. What would Jesus do, right? As a poor, dark-skinned, inclusive kind of a guy. That gets kind of tricky, but one of the things that we'll be looking at is the ways in which UUs carry forward that interdependency with our communities and with all being. The concept of inherent worth doesn't mean that there is no morality, that there is no good and evil, that there is nobody ever needs to be held accountable, and that we're going to erase or deny the power dynamics and inequalities that exist in the real world. That inherent worth, I think about as just a fundamental faith given that worth doesn't depend on any kind of external attribute, and that there is no or almost no irredeemability, right? So that sin might exist, but sinners, maybe not so much. So we think about those principles, and then many congregations across the state, and this is something that is a social justice issue, are adopting the 8th principle to say that we are accountable for anti-oppression and anti-racism faith-based action partnerships, that we need to not just link elbows and sing kumbaya, but that we need to actually act out in the world the foundations of our faith. When we ask about what we mean by organizing, we're not just talking about, joining a rally and marching in the streets. Organizing with MUUSJA involves 4 main facets: preparation, reflection, connection, and action. And each one of those facets has an aspect to it that involves the head, that is thinking, learning, reading, listening to podcasts, watching films, talking with other people, and listening to their stories. The heart aspect, reflecting, feeling our own feelings, acknowledging and understanding how we are viscerally reacting to what we learn. Connecting with other people. This has been a huge issue and a stumbling block for many UUs, who many of us have kind of grown up in a culture where we are really kind of focused on leadership and on thinking things through and doing things on our own. And we maybe aren't all as well prepared for followership and for really looking at who is primarily impacted by the issues we're concerned about. Can we look at how they have been dealing with those issues, sometimes for centuries, and learn from their focus and their actions before we sort of dive in and say, hey, I've got an idea, let me try this XYZ thing, right? So that connection is huge. And then taking action, so that we don't just get stuck in the cycle of the eternal book club and the eternal film group, but that we actually are carrying our values out into the world and connecting with people who are taking action to make a difference. In each one of those areas, there's room for thought. You know, we believe in reason. We believe that science is real. Thank you, vaccines. There's room for feeling. We have to be aware in our bodies and our hearts. Where is the compassion? Where's the hurt? Where's the joy? Because otherwise it all becomes unsustainable. And hands, you know, we carry into each aspect of organizing some room for action. And sometimes that means you're the one who's making the coffee, cooking the spaghetti, scrubbing the kitchen after the spaghetti has been served. And if those folks who do that work are not honored equally with the one who's standing up on the back of the flatbed holding the mic and preaching, then something is wrong. Because we need all of us. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, partly because our time is short, and partly because this is a very busy, very detailed kind of slide. But the reason that I'm putting it up here, and I can send this out if it's interesting, you know, I can send the slides so I can share them. The concept here, this is a way that we take those principles of preparation, action, connection, and reflection, and really start thinking through the details of particular work that we do. This is an example of the collective movement building work that we did over last year to stop line 3. Obviously, as you know, the specific goal of that program didn't win, right? Line 3 got constructed. The tar sands are being pumped through it, you know, probably as we speak, unless it's too cold. But the work that we did in forming relationships with Indigenous partners across northern Minnesota and now into Wisconsin is carrying forward into some work around line 5. The protest to line 3 continues, even though the line is built. You know, it's an everyday choice, today, tomorrow, and the next day, to keep on pumping that tar sand oil. And the foundation of those relationships will be built into additional programming. So for example, MUUSJA is joining with some of our Indigenous partners to design a new UU curriculum called How to Be a Water Protector, to teach children and young families about organizing work for climate justice. And that work involved the direct action of various kinds, from, you know, sitting in the trees and getting arrested, to writing a letter, to some litigation that was going on, to boycotting some of the companies that were funding the pipeline. It involves supporting and sustaining a lot of cooking, a lot of coffee, and a lot of music and art and prayers and spiritual sustenance, massage and physical wellness for the people who were out there on the front lines. It involved a lot of educating and amplifying. So we would look for what was coming from Native Roots Radio, Honor the Earth, Rise Collective, and the other frontline organizations, and be able to lift that up in a platform for people who might have missed that news, right? And then learning how to be good relatives, not to be the people who had to show up and hold the microphone, but the people who were showing up quietly looking around for what was needed, realizing that the tents were full of mud and sand, and sweeping those tents. It's all about people. It's never about the project. And that means that there's no such thing as losing. You can be disappointed, you can be hurt, you can be really devastated, for a bit. But the responsibility to regroup, rise, reconnect, and keep on showing up is built into the relationships. It's always the people and never the project that matters. There will always be another project. And if you have those relationships built with the people who do the work, you cannot fail. Winona LaDuke said way back last June, when we show up, we've already won. So in the interest of time, I'm going to skip one video I was going to show you, but that will give you the YouTube link. There's more online about stuff that happened last year. So I mentioned we have 3 part-time staff. There are 30 UU congregations, and this map with the little stars shows where all the UU congregations are across the state of Minnesota. After I made this, we sort of adopted North and South Dakota because they're not big enough to create their own state action network. There are 2 congregations in South Dakota and 3 in North Dakota that we've sort of try to team with as best we can. And as I mentioned, MUUSJA is a hub. We're not big enough to sort of be, a great basket that holds all this programming. What we are big enough to do is to connect the congregations across the state, and particularly the social justice teams of every one of the congregations. So we have met individually with almost all of those teams to kind of talk about the work that they're doing and what they're interested in accomplishing, what the hot burning issues are in their areas. And as we do that, we hear about things. So I'll give you an example. There's a new team at Unitarian in St. Paul that is very interested in the issue of learning what they can do and whether there are reparations in a way that they can make by teaching or volunteering or even donating money around the issue of the Indian boarding schools. And you might not know that the Unitarians actually, we're complicit in that. We had a boarding school in the state of Montana, and we did not stop and generally actively supported the Indian boarding schools across the state of Minnesota. When you go into that reading, it turns out that that is a little bit complicated, because for some individuals from some of the Native American nations, the boarding schools represented an education and a way to sort of bridge and gain power within the majority settler colonialist Anglo world. And yet at the same time, children were ripped from their families and in many cases abused and mistreated and died in those boarding schools. And so it's a very complicated issue. When that group got very interested in that, they called us and said, do you know who, is anybody else doing this? And we were able to connect them not only with people from the UUA, but also with a group from the Minnesota Council of Churches, which is working on truth and reparations and has a great interest in that specific area. And there are other organizations. And so MUUSJA serves as a weaver, a connector. I think one of the most important things that we do is make introductions and get people connected. Within congregations, sometimes you have a bunch of individuals who are all doing something different and thinking about how can a congregation discern, where is there some joint interest? Do we have 10 people who want to do X, right? Sometimes across congregations, as with the Indian boarding schools issue, and then oftentimes connecting congregations with the UUA organizing world and some folks within the Mid-America region, so our own larger denominational partners. Most of us, as I mentioned, are connected with interfaith partners, and then with secular community partners like, for example, the League of Women Voters. In the UUA, just briefly, the UUA organizing universe is really big. There's a ton of resources. And so one of the things that we try to do is to serve as a conduit for information, grant money sometimes, understanding kind of where the energy is and where the leadership is, bringing in speakers for fellowships and congregations. And within the UUA organizing strategy team, the formal focus right now with Side with Love has these 4 aspects. One is climate justice and environmental action. And the big leaders on that are folks who are part of the organizing strategy team and also the UU Ministry for Earth. The second, particularly in 2022, going into this big election year, is UU the Vote. In 2020, obviously, many of us were in existential crisis over the election, and it did really look like a year when there were competing values at stake. We just observed the 1-year anniversary of the insurrection that was maybe one of the biggest threats to democracy in my lifetime. And MUUSJA helped to coordinate 27 of our 30 congregations, and we sent 59,000 postcards to voters in Georgia, Florida, Wisconsin, and other states where to sort of rebalance the voter turnout in states where voter suppression was really rampant. We also had people doing phone banking and text banking, but the postcard project was probably one of the biggest things that our team organized. Love Resists is the element of Side with Love that really focuses on decriminalization work. And that addresses not only excessive surveillance and police violence towards people of color and people with disabilities, but also deportation, the imprisonment of children on our border, and some of the protests that are happening, for example, up in Sherwood, Minnesota, which is one of the larger incarceration centers for undocumented immigrants in our state. And then finally, UU Uplift is the element of Side with Love nationally that addresses and continues LGBTQIA+ welcoming congregations. And the MUUSJA'S, the way that MUUSJA plays that out is by organizing the Pride festivals across our state. So again, this is a huge busy slide and I'm going to skip through very briefly, but I want you to just be aware of the incredible range of resources that are out there. DRUM is the Diverse Revolutionary UU something, and I apologize, I'm blocking on the last 2 words, but DRUM is the organization within the UU universe for Black, Indigenous, and people of color. There is an Indigenous caucus, an Asian American caucus within DRUM, the Latinx caucus, and Black caucus, and I think maybe some others that are part of that group. We're going to be teaming with them along with all of the other state action networks this year in particular, to be able to be strong allies and to sort of lift up the DRUM members who are part of us, and in fact a couple of their board are Minnesotans. Black Lives of Unitarian Universalism specifically focuses on Black UU's joy and power and resources, and they are starting an initiative to build some housing in some affordable, accessible housing in North Minneapolis as a beta test for some of the work that they want to do. UU Rise focuses on immigration justice, equal access on disability justice. UUSC is our service committee that looks at international human rights, including things like how are folks in the Philippines doing after a typhoon just leveled them. They've done work in Haiti for many, many years and continuing to do that. So on all around the world. UU College of Social Justice is actually teaming with us on a curriculum called Being a Good Relative. And we're hoping that they'll team with us on our How to Be a Water Protector curriculum, really carrying that those relationships with Indigenous peoples and climate justice forward. The UU Women's Federation has been around for a really long time. My mom was very active in that group with a curriculum a few of you might remember called Cakes for the Queen of Heaven back in the early days of feminism in the 70s. And they focus on women's rights. They also have some grants for groups that are really focused on women. And then UU Social Justice is a group that was just based in Washington, but now is moving towards a more national focus, especially I think this year, to try to help Unitarians effectively do lobbying at a federal level. So if that's something you're interested in, that's who you want to connect with. All right. I'm not even going to name all of these. This is just a quick slide to say that our role in MUUSJA is not only to be connected with these national UU resources, to know about them and to help you access them for the projects that you're belovedly interested in doing, but also to connect Unitarians with people in our communities. Again, really learning how to be good followers and not just good leaders, right? To be good followers in order to be good leaders. So we act as an on-ramp often between some of the community and interfaith partners of which we are a part or with whom we are connected, and then help congregations to team with those groups to be more effective, more powerful, and more accountable in the work that we do. I'm gonna play a short clip here from Tim Corden from Wisconsin, because I think one of the most important things that we can do is cross borders and be good hosts. So let me see if we can have Tim speak to that. This is Liz Jacola, a Dakota singer, just with some shots of the work that we did at Line 3 last year. And these are scenes from the Treaty People Walk for the Water. Some of you might have been there or seen it on TV. These folks walked 250 miles from Bemidji to St. Paul. And every step of the way, it was the Unitarian Universalist congregations.
Without MUUSJA, I don't think that the UUs that I helped bring to Minnesota would have found, we wouldn't have found our way to the multi-faith camp. Perhaps we wouldn't have found our way to the congregation in Duluth, the hospitality, the inroads that MUUSJA gave us, introducing us to people, showing us where to go, were just so invaluable.
We made a lot of coffee. To wrap up a bit with a look forward, we think about the arc of the year, and to some extent, the fact that our staff is so small, and the fact that we are, in a sense, a rapid response network for the state, means that we are nimble and sometimes reactive, and ready to respond to what's happening. We were not anticipating the murder of George Floyd a couple of years ago. even though that kind of thing had been building for a long time. But that particular event obviously galvanized people into a kind of action and has ongoing repercussions around rethinking what public safety and policing ought to look like. So this year, the entire country has a common read. The UUA has called for our common read to be the book called Defund Fear by Zach Norris, which is a very thoughtful, very readable, research-informed reflection. And in that category of preparation, it's a way for us to all begin to think more deeply about the background and purpose of the way that policing happens and ICE detention happens in America, and to imagine how that might look different. So we will be participating, many congregations are going to be reading that book and talking about it together, and MUUSJA will have some circles online as well to do that. But the first thing at the beginning of the year is in January and February, we are joining with the Joint Religious Legislative Coalition, which is a very unique group in Minnesota that connects Jews, Muslims, Catholics, and Protestant major denominational bodies to select usually anywhere from 3 to 7 specific bills that we want passed. And because the 4 major faiths, and then some of the smaller ones like Unitarians, Buddhists, Hindus, and so forth, come in and agree about that. These are not going to be the bills that have to do with abortion or gay rights or even gun violence. There are a lot of things that we might possibly agree about as Unitarians, but not every faith does. So these bills will have to do with poverty, housing, childcare, basically the sort of inalienable common good. And we will be co-sponsoring some trainings in January and February to get ready to talk to legislators. And then we will be participating during the week of the 15th of March in the Day on the Hill with JRLC to talk with our own legislators across the state. Now, you and Winona are particularly important where this comes in. And maybe we can chat a little bit more about this in maybe in February, some of us can meet again and talk about why Winona is so important. You have legislators right now who are very influential, and if they can get behind some of these anti-poverty, pro-housing, pro-childcare bills, it could have tremendous impact for everyone in the state, and we can make a difference to that. In March and April, there's a program called Spring for Change, an intergenerational climate justice effort that we are teaming with the UU Service Committee and the UU Ministry for Earth to work on. We'll be reading the book Defund Fear, as I mentioned. We coordinate all of the Pride festivals across the state. We're primarily responsible for coordinating UU's for Twin Cities Pride, but we've also been showing up to support and work with Mankato and Duluth and Rochester and Winona. Rochester was canceled last year, as you probably know, but we're hoping that'll happen going forward, Omicron permitting. We're doing a project with the UUA General Assembly. I'm coordinating some of the other State Action Network leaders to talk about what a State Action Network can do and why we're useful. And then we're going to be doing, for the first time ever, we're doing a workshop at Camp Unistar. Right now, my working title is SJW Camp. I'm reclaiming social justice warrior, which is a big insult. If you're on Facebook, and you do anything, somebody probably called you an SJW at some point. It's supposed to be an insult, but I actually think being a social justice warrior is pretty cool. I mentioned how to be a water protector. And then we also are a member of the Minnesota Sanctuary State Coalition, which is a interfaith group that is really working on resisting detention and deportation, and particularly preventing any new construction of private prisons, and trying to decouple our counties from working with ICE and jailing and detaining undocumented immigrants who have committed no crime simply because they don't have papers. So lots going on and lots coming up. There will be in the email that you get, I know this is not real helpful on screen, but there are some basic bookmarks that if you're a member of your social justice committee or just, kind of interested in what's going on in UU organizing world, what does our, Cornel West said, justice is what love looks like in public. Justice is what love looks like in public. And we are sometimes identified as the love people who can't wrap their mouth around the big mouthful that Unitarian Universalism is. Sometimes we'll say, oh, I see those yellow t-shirts. I see that side with love thing. There are the love people, right? But the justice is what love looks like in public. And hey, we're running a little bit late. We got a little bit of a late start. Thank you, technology. But it is time for coffee. I'm going to unshare my screen. And it's almost 11. I know some of you probably need to leave, but for folks who would like to hang around and chat for another, 20 minutes or so, whatever, half an hour, we can certainly do that. And I would love to hear more about kind of why you decided to show up this morning. And besides to see all your friends, which is a really good reason. And particularly, kind of if there are groups that you're connecting with, issues that you're concerned with, projects you're interested in, let's talk about that and just be aware that if your time's done today, I am more than happy to kind of come back and chat with, a social justice team or just whoever wants to show up, really thinking about some of these projects, or if your thing hasn't been mentioned, by all means mention it, because that's where it comes from. It's a network, not a dictatorship. All right. Thank you. So I'm switching my view to gallery so I can see people who are on video. And yeah, give me a second. So here's my question for you. What was it that drew you to show up today for this particular discussion?
Well, I come up every week for whatever the discussion is. This was really, really helpful for me personally to see the inclusiveness, because even though UU's, and I've been part of this group in Winona for about 10 years, is very special. We're not exceptional in the sense of exclusive. And I really like that the stress on people and relationships. There are several groups in Winona that are doing a lot of this kind of work through the Interfaith Council, the Afghan Support Network, the Sheltering Network, welcoming now about 5 different individuals or families here from Fort McCoy, the Afghan resettlement, as well as others from Honduras, Guatemala. However, we've also have a representative with the group in Rochester. It's the Southeastern Minnesota Interfaith Immigrant Legal Defense. And they raise about $60,000 a year for legal defense of immigrants who are in detention. As you said, they, whatever the minor reason was, and also now they've expanded their contract to help also, a certain number of others who are seeking asylum. So anyway, there's a lot of really good work, very generous people, generous with their time and their money. That's all.
Thank you, Dick. That's fascinating to know. And thank you for being brave enough to be the first one to speak as well. So, what are there particular, other groups or issues that other folks here have been, kind of keeping an eye on or thinking about getting connected with or been connected with?
If I might, can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Okay.
Your photo is coming up as UU Fellowship Winona. So if you could say who you are.
Okay. I'm going to go back to your first question.
Say who you are.
Huh? Yeah, I'm John Collins. I'm going to go back to your first question about why we showed up today.
Yeah.
Yeah. This kind of work that you do is so challenging. I'm always intrigued by the origins that brought you to this commitment. So could you tell us just a little bit about how that happened? Because it always fascinates me. Thank you.
Well, I didn't really have a choice. I was just a kid. I got dragged along, and I think a lot of us who actually have end up with social justice organizing as a core of our lives basically get into it because that's what our parents did. So I just I was born in 1956. I just turned 65 this year. And so when I was a little girl, the whole, the soundtrack and the backdrop of my childhood was "We Shall Overcome." That was what all of the grown-ups around me were doing all the time. So I just thought that was what grown-ups were supposed to do. I worked as a hospital psychologist for about 40 years because that was, fun and a way to make money. And it was a very interesting job. And there were a lot of opportunities there for it to do some advocacy work, both within my profession and with state education and healthcare issues. So that was kind of my organizing background. And then I quit and I worked for my preferred political party for a couple of years, and in 2018 helped to get several state representatives elected who have been wonderful allies on some of the climate justice and racial justice work that we've been doing since then. So I had some additional training in running campaigns, and that was informative. I was a Girl Scout leader for 9 years. And that's probably the single most useful training I've had for being an organizer, because dealing with, if you can deal with a group of middle school girls, you can deal with anybody anywhere on the planet, I promise you. So so those are some trainings and some experience. And I think where those are some of the kinds of things that sometimes can get people into doing organizing. But I'll tell you, the thing that keeps you in it, that is the antidote to burnout, is are those moments of absolute joy. Pouring that coffee in the center of treaty people who were walking 250 miles, something I could never do. I drove from spot to spot and cooked. Being in the rotunda of the Minnesota State Capitol on the day that the legislature passed the marriage amendment bill, back when the state was people were trying to ban same-sex marriage. And as a child of gay parents, that was something that was very deeply personal for me. That victory and that moment of being, feeling like you're one cell in this gigantic beating heart, filled with love, with people chanting, "We've got your back," and in that case chanting, "We won, love won." there's nothing like that. There's nothing like that. And every time that something awful happens, and it always will, right? You know, come back to that feeling of being a teeny piece of something so much bigger and so much more powerful. And I have no sane reason for believing that love will always win, but I believe it in my bones. Sorry, that got a little preachy.
And I'm sorry you can't see me. And if you don't, I want one brief follow-up. You, at the very start, you said you had a lot of early travels that sparked your commitment to this. Could you just share just a bit about some of your early travels?
Yeah, I've never had a chance to actually live outside this country, but my family moved around a lot within the United States. So I think just, you know, living in California and Boston and Iowa, Nevada, Chicago, New York, and then for many years now in Minnesota. I lived in Rochester for a while and then moved up to Bloomington. You know, I've had a chance to live in a lot of places that were very diverse in terms of socioeconomic and racial and religious diversities, and to, you know, have people in my family who were marginalized, and that I think that on the one hand, what I don't have that many people who've stayed in one place more can appreciate is this you know, deep sense of rootedness and having many relations, you know, in the same area and having deep roots in a particular location, and I think that's a beautiful thing that, you know, I can't claim that, but on the other hand, what, you know, the gift of my life experience, I think, has been some appreciation for both the differences and the commonalities among all of the communities where I've lived, and the differences and the commonalities among all of the different kinds of UU congregations that I've participated with. So
thank you so much.
Thank you for the questions.
Yeah.
Other thoughts that people have?
Well, I don't mean to hog this, Karen, but at the beginning, I was a little uncertain if this should just be kind of an organizational, boring talk, but it was anything but that. That you spoke to my head with ideas, to my heart with motivation, and really an impetus to action. So I thank you very much.
That heart space, so important.
Well, thank you so much, Karen. We have your contact information, and I'm sure if people want to reach out to you for more conversation or with questions or for more information, they can certainly reach out and get in touch with you.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I am, and Deb, I'll send you, I'm going to be talking with the congregation in Northfield early in February, and I'm blocking on the exact day, but I think they will, I think they are recording that, and I'll send you that for what it's worth. If there are folks, you know, just in terms of sort of specific calls to action, I just want to kind of underscore that this is a year when we will again be getting a little political. You know, obviously MUUSJA is a 501c3. We are a nonpartisan group. And so we do not support, you know, one specific political party. You know, we have folks who are independent and Green Party and DFLers and the Ramstead Republicans. And, you know, so there's, we don't have a commitment to any specific political party, and we certainly don't endorse or, you know, promote the campaign of any particular candidate. But one of the things that we do feel is very important for Unitarian Universalists to do is to consider the fact that the folks who get elected are folks who will be making the rules about how we share stuff we all need, right? So we will be active this year in really strongly encouraging, you know, I mean, I would love it if every UU in the state could weigh in at least once on at least one issue with their elected representatives and senators. I've got mine on speed dial, you know, and it's so easy to talk to them. I'm betting most of you have probably done that at some time, but if you haven't, I would like to show you how to at least send them a postcard and ideally make a phone call, and super ideally join us during that week of March with your multi-faith neighbors to talk to the folks who are your representatives and senators, whether you love them or, you know, or even despise them, doesn't matter. They're making the rules and they need to be hearing from you. So that's one of the things that we're going to look at in January, February, and March. And you know, if anybody has the slightest interest in that, shoot me an email and I'll tell you how to get connected.
And I would just add, Karen, just so you know, for anything like that, if you could send it to Jan Taylor, because then she'll make sure that it either gets to the right folks in the fellowship, or we'll get it out to everybody. So
you bet. And hi, Jan, and thank you for this invitation. I see your big J right in the middle of my screen. So gotcha.